Good evening, and thank you everyone for coming. My name is Melissa Isidore, and I'm a senior urban studies concentrator here at Brown. We're here tonight to ask the question, what is the future of food? So food is such an important component of all of our lives. The food that we choose to put in our bodies every single day, it has such a profound effect on our health and well-being. The food industry is ever evolving. The food that we eat currently, it usually travels hundreds of miles to get from farm to table. And with increasing climate issues like drought and flooding, we're seeing problems with the agriculture industry, and we need new technologies to approach it moving forward. So tonight we're going to talk about how new agriculture technology and vertical farming are expected to disrupt existing food systems and create a more sustainable world. So for tonight's format, we're going to have both of our speakers give a brief, 15-minute presentation, and it'll be followed by question and answer, which we hope you'll all have lots of questions afterwards because our speakers have a lot to share with you. And then I'm going to hand it over to Sierra.
Yeah. And I'm Sierra Clark. I'm also a senior at Brown. I study cognitive neuroscience. And this event is actually happening because of a course at Brown. So as you guys know, Brown is pretty unique in that students can create their own courses. So Melissa and I created a course on vertical farming, and we wanted to explore what it is. So we spent the past 3 months figuring that out. That's how I met Despommier. And David is the CEO of Indigo, and he's actually funding this course, as well as help with the environmental science department. So thank you to Indigo and the environmental science department. As a shameless plug, I'll tell you that we're having a part 2 of this course. So next semester, we're having another course where we're writing business plans in food and agriculture. So if you like what you see here, you want to really dig into it, do some writing and some research in these areas, definitely talk to us after the event, and we'll see if we can get together and do some amazing things. So I would like to introduce our speakers for today. First up, we have David Perry. David is the CEO of Indigo Agriculture. He is a serial entrepreneur. He has led 2 companies to successful IPOs. That's a big deal for you guys. And since then has dedicated his life to creating companies in food and agriculture. And between you and me, he's one of the smartest people you'll ever meet. So let's give a warm welcome to David.
Thank you. I'm one of the smartest people she's ever met, but she had to point out where the laser pointer was. Thanks, everybody. I'm glad to be here. I'm going to jump right into it because Sierra was very specific that I only had 15 minutes. So I'll do a little bit on who I am, a little bit on sort of an overview of this talk, and talk about agriculture. So I grew up on a farm in South Arkansas. That's what I did for the first 18 years of my life. I then got a chemical engineering degree and an MBA. I think of myself as a life sciences entrepreneur. I started a company called Chemdex in '97 and took that public in '99. Started a company called Anacor Pharmaceuticals in 2002, took it public in 2010, and Pfizer bought Anacor this year for $5.4 billion. So that gave me the opportunity to sort of step back and think about what I wanted to do next. And I decided that the most interesting problems in the world that I reasonably had the skills to focus on were around food and agriculture. Specifically, 3 big questions. How are we going to feed everybody? How can we do that in a way that is more environmentally sustainable and better for our health, consumers' health? And third is, how can we change the consumption of food so as to reverse the trends of obesity and all of the metabolic diseases that come from that? And so as a result, I started 2 companies. One, Indigo, which is what I'll spend most of my time on today, that's focused on pioneering a new way of doing agriculture, one that includes or uses fewer chemicals and chemical fertilizers. And then Farewell, which is more focused on changing behaviors around how we consume food and reversing those trends of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and all the things that come from that. So I'll talk a little bit about the history of farming, sort of how did we get to here. talk a little bit about the state of agriculture today, and then, where might we go from here? So, although most of us don't think of this on a daily basis, one can argue that agriculture is actually the world's most important industry. 40% of the global workforce works in agriculture. It supports $5 trillion worth of markets, and of course it sustains everybody in the room and everybody on Earth multiple times per day. We're obviously heavily dependent on agriculture, even though it's relatively new in human history. Our most distant ancestors were around a couple of million years ago. Our immediate ancestors were around a couple of 100,000 years ago, and we really only started farming in the last 10,000 years. Prior to that, we were hunters and gatherers. We started domesticating crops in different regions depending on what was native to that area. At the time, of course, the world's population was only about 5 million people. Today it's 7 billion people, so it makes sense that we would have needed to change our practices to support everyone. We've sort of constantly been at the brink of being able to support everyone. Most famously, a guy named Thomas Malthus proposed sort of the Malthusian dilemma. And that dilemma is essentially that population increases on an exponential basis, and our ability to produce food only goes up as we can farm more and more land. And he said it is inevitable then that population is going to outgrow our ability to produce food, and a whole bunch of people are going to starve to death unless something fundamentally different happens. Fortunately, that hasn't happened yet. And the reason is that we've managed to make this curve a whole lot steeper than this. At the time, he thought the only way we were going to produce more food was to farm more land. But we figured out how to make land more productive. And we've done that through a combination of things that is often called the Green Revolution. So we started using 3 technologies in abundance. The first of those is plant breeding. So picking out plants and combining them with one another to make them yield more, be healthier, be resistant to pests, etc. 2 is chemical fertilizer. And we're increasing the use of fertilizer dramatically, and most of the increasing yields that we see today in the world are just increased use of fertilizer. And then 3rd, agricultural chemicals. These are things like insecticides, fungicides, herbicides that obviously reduce disease, make plants more productive. But all of these technologies have real downsides. So, in fact, they're mostly vilified today for really good reasons. These technologies aren't particularly good for the environment, and they're not particularly good for our health. On the other hand, at the time, they were the best we could do, and they probably allowed us to feed 1 billion people that we wouldn't have been able to feed otherwise. So they were very important breakthroughs. We're just fortunate, hopefully, to be able to do better now and gradually replace some of these things. So we're back to a spot that would look familiar to Malthus. If we continue to increase the productivity of agriculture, it will be well below where the World Health Organization thinks we're going to need to be to supply food for 9.5 to 10 billion people by 2050. So those lines that Malthus described are going to cross somewhere between 2040 and 2050 if everything remains the same. If we continue to increase food production at the rate it's going and population continues to increase at the rate it's going. And in some ways, it's worse than that, because we've got to be able to increase food production against a number of headwinds. The first of those being water. We are currently drawing down on the Earth's water reserves. Water reserves exist in 2 places. They're in lakes and reservoirs above ground that we can all see. And then they're in underground reservoirs or aquifers. And those underground reservoirs don't get nearly as much attention because we don't visibly see that they're there. But that's where most of the water is, and those water levels are dropping dramatically. So we know that this is not sustainable. We can't continue to draw those down indefinitely. And in fact, we're going to have to significantly reduce the amount of water we're using by about 40% in order to get to a sustainable level. About 70% of the water used in the world is for agriculture, so you can't really solve this problem without thinking about agriculture. So figuring out how to grow plants with less fresh water is one important solution. The second is that we're using up our available farmland. Part of that is just as the population grows, we put houses on it. But part of it is that the farming practices that we're using tend to degrade the land that we have. Third, warmer weather makes the earth less productive. That's not true everywhere. If you happen to be a wheat farmer in northern Russia or northern Canada, warmer weather is probably good news. But for most of the growing region in the world, it will get less productive because of warmer weather. And overall, we expect to lose 3 to 16% of our productivity by 2080. And then finally, our existing technologies are plateauing. The amount of yield increase that we're getting from additional breeding or additional use of chemicals or additional use of fertilizer is declining. In the 60s and 70s, we got about 2% a year increase in agricultural yield. Now it's down to less than 1% a year and continuing to get smaller. So we've got we need to increase productivity. We need to do it in spite of these challenges. It's interesting graphics on the left. And this represents numbers of acre per person. So it's interesting to note that today we're about half an acre per person is what you have available to feed you. By 2040 or 2050, that'll be about a third of an acre per person. It seems remarkably small, doesn't it? That's for everything. That's for any produce you eat. It's for the grains that you eat. That covers whatever land needs to support whatever animals that you eat. It's a remarkably small number. It really sort of brings into perspective how productive we have to be with the agricultural land that we have available. More good graphics. So I'll walk you through these. This is the economics for a farmer in the United States, specifically someone farming soybeans. So over the last 40 years, ag input prices have gone up 4.6x. So that's the cost of seed and fertilizer and chemicals, et cetera. Over that time, the amount of herbicide applied per acre has gone up 1.8x. The yield per acre has gotten better, so we're now getting 1.7x more per acre. But remember, that's a whole lot less than the increase in input prices. And because of that, farmers are actually less profitable today than they were 40 years ago. Imagine, that's a remarkable statement. That means that farmers today, despite all of the benefits or all of the innovations in chemicals and breeding and GMOs, regardless of what you think of those, haven't actually benefited the farmer at all. In fact, they're worse off today than they were 4 decades ago. Another way of saying that is that those input providers, Monsanto, Dow, DuPont, they've managed to extract every bit of that value for themselves and not left any for the farmer. So that creates a fairly urgent problem for us. How do we increase the productivity of agriculture? How do we do it while swapping out a lot of the existing technologies that got us the gains that we've gotten so far? And how do we do it in a way that's more economically sustainable for the farmer? These are real challenges, and I'll talk to you about one solution, but it's going to take many solutions to fully solve the problem. The best news is that today's pace of technology change creates opportunities everywhere. Our increased understanding of biology, our ability to decode the genome of plants and microbes and animals, the increase in computing power, big data and the ability to do machine learning creates opportunities to solve these problems today that didn't exist even 10 or 20 years ago. So we have tools that allow us to do this that just weren't available when our old technologies were created. One opportunity to do this is to use the plant microbiome. So the microbiome means the microbes that live naturally inside of plants and evolved over 150 million years to be symbiotic with plants. You know, microbes had an evolutionary incentive for the plants they were living in to do well, thrive, and reproduce, because that gave the microbes greater habitat in which to do the same thing. And so over 150 million years, they evolved all kinds of ways to allow them to do that, including helping them fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. Nitrogen is important for them to be able to grow and harness the energy from the sun. To be able to fight off pests, insects, weeds, other things. Those microbes evolved with plants over all that time and worked beautifully until, of course, modern agriculture came along. And then we applied insecticides and herbicides and fungicides, especially fungicides, to hundreds of millions of acres and dramatically changed the number and diversity of microbes inside of plants. So what we're doing at Indigo is adding back those beneficial microbes that have been removed from modern agricultural practices. We started by collecting plant samples from all over the world. So we've collected over 40,000 plant samples from every continent on Earth except Antarctica, at every latitude from the equator up to the Arctic. We then sequenced those microbes, so we have the DNA sequence of every one of the microbes that we extracted from those samples. We put all of that into a big database and do some machine learning and some algorithms that help us predict what microbes might work best in which situations. We then add back those beneficial microbes in the form of a seed coating, which creates a healthier plant. And healthier plants produce more, they produce better food, and they need fewer agricultural chemicals and fertilizers to help them survive and thrive. We're a 3-year-old company. Our first commercial product we launched in cotton this spring. It's intended to help cotton thrive when under water stress, when cotton is being grown without an optimal amount of water. And that's pretty much all cotton. So far, so good. So you can see some early cotton plants here. Untreated is on the left, treated is on the right, and you'll notice a significant difference in root mass between the two of them. Root mass is a really good indicator that a plant will do well in dry conditions. And here you see those plants at a greater stage or a later stage, where the larger indigo treated plants on the right, untreated on the left. We just launched this spring. The indigo cotton is now planted on over 50,000 acres of cotton land in Texas and 4 surrounding states. We are continuing to launch new products, so we're launching indigo wheat right now, and we're working on other major agricultural crops: soy, corn, rice, etc. As I mentioned, we're about 3 years old. We're headquartered in just outside of Boston in Charlestown, Massachusetts. We also have a commercial team in Memphis. We've grown pretty substantially this year. We went from about 40 employees at the beginning of the year to around 110 today. We've raised a lot of money to do this. So we've raised a total of $156 million. $100 million of that came in a financing in July that valued the company at over $500 million in total. That gives you a sense of what people think is the potential for new technologies that solve real problems in agriculture. We're not going to be the only solution to this. Hopefully, if we're successful, we'll make a significant impact and improve our ability to feed the world in a more sustainable way. But it won't be by ourselves. It's going to take a whole bunch of new innovations and new ways of doing things. And you're about to hear about one of those. Thank you.
It's a great segue.
Thank you, David. So now we will hear from Dickson Despommier. He'll be talking about vertical farming. Dickson is emeritus professor from Columbia University in microbiology and public health. He also is the author of The Vertical Farm, Feeding the World in the 21st Century. And he essentially is the catalyst of vertical farming's existing around the country and around the world. So thank you, Dixon.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for this invitation and the opportunity to explain why what Sierra just said is not exactly true. Because actually, this started in a classroom. The idea of what I'm about to talk about started in a classroom. And someone here, I understand, has brought my book with them, and I would be happy to sign that book. And if you look in the back of it, under the appendix, you can find the names of 106 students who, over 10 years, participated in classes where we brainstormed our way through the very questions that David was raising to begin with. And that is the biggest problem facing humanity over the next, let's say, 200 to 300 years is, let's say the population stabilizes at 10 billion. How do you provide enough of everything for those people so that everybody has an equal chance to succeed in their lives and no resources hold them back like water, food, even air. So that was the biggest challenge, and so we decided to just start with food. And it turns out to be a challenging problem, as you can tell by the depressing introductions that both of us are going to give to you. Why go any further? You should max out your credit cards, go on vacation, and get it over with, and that's the end. So you'll notice right away that I begin on a positive note because the cover of the New Yorker in May of 2014 began to give hints that cities are becoming epicenters for sustainable behavior, not just with capturing passive energy sources like wind and solar, but also producing significant amounts of food, because at that point, the human population had reached a tipping point of half rural, half urban. You can easily see that if you look at the election results of 2016. That's exactly the way that election broke off in terms of distribution of votes for Clinton and Trump. So the biggest challenges we face involve everything, of course, but clean water is first, because if you don't have clean water, you don't have anything else. But then we need food security and safety, reduce dramatically our dependence on fossil fuels. Thank you, Elon Musk, for leading the way there, and other people too, but he's really a loud voice in an otherwise wilderness of people wandering around wondering what to do. And he's not waiting for anyone to tell him, he's doing it. And that's the idea. That's the point of this whole presentation. Don't wait for someone to tell you what to do. If I give you two choices, you pick one. Here's the first choice. What do you think the world will look like 100 years from now? Write me a 2-page essay. It's easy, right? Just sit down, well, the world will... Then hand that in first. So here's your second essay. How would you like the world to look 100 years from now? It's a different essay. That's an active, proactive process. If you say, here's the way I think it's going to look, that means you're sitting in the background looking at this thing happening and complaining and bitching and moaning the whole time. The other one says, damn it, I'm going to just grab it and I'm going to run with it. And this is the way I would like it to look. And so that's the way it will look. And that's what our students did. So I'll show you what happened, because this is a crazy idea, by the way. So food and water, and they're linked, obviously, inexorably. So 70% of the water is used to grow food. And then, by the way, it's not just used, and then we can use that for something else afterwards. It's used, and then we can never use it afterwards because it's been spoiled by all these agrochemicals that you just heard about. And it's despoiling the rest of the world, including the ocean. How can you do that? But it does just that. Ag runoff is unpreventable. And therefore, even though it supplies the wherewithal so we can have food, it creates intractable situations, and not the least of which is runoff. And the runoff is now starting to show up in bizarre ways. For instance, the acidity of the ocean has been changing. If you're a shellfish, you can no longer make calcium carbonate because the pH of the ocean is wrong. That's too bad because I really like shrimp. I'm a big fan of shrimp. And they have a calcium carbonate outer coating called their exoskeleton. And when that disappears, the shrimp will disappear. When the shrimp disappear, the whales will you got the idea. Dead zones. By the way, I was born in New Orleans, so I look at my hometown and say, what a tragedy to live at the bottom of the sewer of agriculture. Climate change, deny it or not, I don't care, it's happening anyway. You know, the Chinese didn't do that, okay? This is not a plot to derail US industry. This is real. This is absolutely real, and we have to deal with this in many ways. And so the way to first start is to say that, you know, who cares who did it? Let's try to do something about it. We're removing the carbon sink, however. The sink is where the carbon goes back to renew itself in the form of plant life so that we can use it again. This is the way the world looks to NASA, and this is the latest Landsat 8 photograph composite of the distribution of plants in the world, and all that yellow that you see is plant life that we eat. So that's farmland, and if you add it all up together, 7.3 billion people consume the size of South America in terms of land mass. Now, you know, in that sense, Malthus, if he had known that, he would have had a stronger argument to make. But he didn't know that, of course. Most of the farming that occurs is not under ideal conditions either. It's really harsh conditions that have resulted in use and reuse and reuse and reuse of land. And as a result of it, it's no longer as productive as it started out to be. Very few places that are still gifted with regards to fertile land. So agriculture, although over 10,000 years of history, has jump-started the human species into, from 1 to 5 billion, or a million rather. That's a mil, that's an M, not a B, into today's population of roughly 7.3 billion people. And some people would argue that's a good thing. It is a good thing in one sense, but it's a bad thing in another sense because it isn't stopping, it's continuing. And we've got these problems to face. And so imagine yourself as one of these 7 public health students sitting in a classroom and saying, for the first half of the semester, I talked about environmental impacts on health, and then the second half was, and they didn't let me get to the second half. They stopped me. They said, we don't want to hear any more of this. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I don't know what I'm going to do. I was looking forward to a career in public health. What good am I going to do? What good can one person do in this sense? We'll get back to that later. But I said, okay, what do you want to do then? So they got back to me the week after that, and they said, well, maybe we can see if New York City can do something good like raising food on the rooftops. I said, okay, that's a great plan. Let's just talk about Manhattan. No commercial buildings, just the apartment houses. How much land is there? And then what crop would you raise, and how many people could you feed? By the end of that exercise, which took them the entire half of that semester, they concluded we can feed 2% of Manhattan raising rice as the most energetic crop on the rooftops of New York. And that's when I turned to them and said, that's a good idea. Why don't we turn it into a great idea by simply taking your rooftop farm and moving it into abandoned buildings? Because there's a ton of them. Why don't we do that? That improves the land use, right? That's what we do with people. Why can't we do this with farmland? So they looked at me and they said, we can do that? I said, of course you can do that. Meanwhile, my nose kept growing longer and longer and longer. So while cities only occupy 2 to 3% of the Earth's land mass, it's responsible for 70% of the carbon emissions. Even when you build a building out of concrete, a Roman invention, it requires that you burn off the CO2 from limestone first to create calcium oxide, which can then recombine as you add water to the mix to make concrete. The Pantheon is still a living example of that technology. And that, when you do that, when you make that calcium oxide, the CO2 goes into the atmosphere. So remember that the next time you see a building made out of concrete, Like there's a building in Chicago that Trump created, which is solid concrete. It's the world's largest concrete building. Cities are unknowns. Stuff goes in, we use it, and we know what happens. It comes out as wastes. So here's the big question, right? And this is the one we tried to answer too. You all have to have this, but we also have to have this. So the natural world is our life support system. Who teaches that? I mean, where do you learn that? If you go to a school of public health, they don't even touch on that subject. All right, public health is the intervention of ill health on large populations by technology, like water purification and food inspection and things of this sort. It doesn't say to prevent them. It just says we can actually intervene here. Well, yes, we can prevent them, but we can't address the real issues of why they're there to begin with, and that is overuse of the environment. So in a sense, cities are the parasites of the earth. So we have to fix a way of doing this, and so many different approaches. Permaculture, improving the land and returning carbon to the soil in places where you can do that. Soil-based agriculture is not bad. It's just that it's going to change with climate change. So what you really have to do, though, is to create cities that are totally off the grid. They're off the energy grid, they're off the water grid, they're off the food grid. That's the ultimate goal of doing all of this. There's no other reason for wanting to do it, frankly. So we can create things by looking to nature. And here's the saying that I would hope you can remember. And the saying goes from an ecologist, the lips of an ecologist, to Howard Odum said, nature has all the answers. Yeah, we've heard that before. Nature has all the answers. Okay, so what's your question? What is your question? What is your question? What question do you have that when you look to nature, you can find that answer? So my big answer is, I want cities to behave like ecosystems. So it took us 60 to 80 years to learn how ecosystems actually function. But we now know enough about this to say if we combined all of the characteristics of an ecosystem, which this represents, and it's only missing one thing in a city, and that is primary productivity, then we could end up like this, where we have all the characteristics of an intact, sustainable ecosystem, and by applying technology, we can use and reuse and reuse and reuse and reuse water. We can do the same thing with urban food production. We can do the same thing with passive energy capture, et cetera, et cetera. We can do the whole thing simply by studying nature first. So one of the most important courses that I would hope every politician eventually is obliged to be an expert in is ecology, because that's our basis for life. Of course, that's not going to happen either. But I think that farming inside the city is a good idea, and it's one that other people think so now too, because there's a lot of examples of it. So we can now find lots of vertical farms throughout the world, whereas when this course began in 1999, there were none. So I'm not going to say we're totally responsible for this, although I would love to say that. That would be on my tombstone. It would say, here lies so-and-so, what's his face, responsible for vertical farming. I would love to say, you know, but I'm not going to have a tombstone because I'm going to get cremated and recycled. So vertical farms are nothing more than high-tech greenhouses stacked on each other. If you want a definition of a vertical farm, that's what it is. It's not farming in a vertical fashion in a one-story building. That's a greenhouse. It's two-story greenhouse or more. That's the vertical farm. And that's a very important distinction because a lot of confusion exists in the internet as to what a vertical farm really is. So having coined the phrase, at least I'm obliged to give you my definition. So your choice here is, okay, what will the future city look like? No, that's the wrong question, right? You know the right question, don't you? What would you like the future city to look like? You're going to be part of that. You will determine the future of that city. You're going to be a planner. How can you plan when it's already planned? It's already done. That's crazy, isn't it? But you have to anyway. You can't play video games that look like this anymore. This is not good. Everybody loves this kind of stuff. It's death and destruction from start to finish. Why? Because it's a reflection of the way we're heading. No one likes to play the Jetsons games. That's just, like Farmville. That's, it's a good game, but it's not the right game. Here's one of the right games. You can go up to MIT. That's not far. You can almost walk there and meet this guy, or invite him down. Caleb Harper would love to come down here. He says at night in Boston, when the lights go down, when is that, like at 2 o'clock in the morning? And you look across the river, and you see these purple lit building. What the hell is that? It's in the Media Lab somewhere, but what is it? It turns out to be an experimental, one-story, high-tech potential for a multiple-story vertical farm. So they're working all the parameters out. They want this to be open source. They want everybody to have access to it. And they'd like to see this happen in many, many different places. You're all familiar with the outlet store Target? Why are you laughing? We all call it Target. It's Target. I just shopped at Target. Well, Caleb Harper is partnering with Target through the Media Lab to make home growing units available. And if you stand these up and put them into 2 stories or stack them in various configurations, you've got yourself an individual vertical farm. Oops. Other schools are working on this too, so it's not just one university. And there are lots of now they're picking this up. So we can farm smart. This is how it looks inside, but multiple layers, right? Even IKEA is getting involved. They have home growing units of hydroponics for kids. And look at what the kid can say. He says, I grew this in my house. They supplied a meal for their family simply by working with a technology that's quite old, actually. So, touchy-feely, warm, kind of fuzzy 1960s hippie, that stuff. You're tree hugging. My name is Despommier, by the way, which means apple tree. So if you want to hug a tree, I'm available. This is another motto which I would love everyone to use. When nature is balanced, humanity thrives. So learn more, of course. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dixon. So now we're going to have both speakers come sit at the front. And we have this really funky, cool microphone that you get to throw around. And we will throw it to you if you have a question. So, questions, raise your hand.
We don't get to throw.
That's my job. I know you guys have questions. Who wants to go first?
Just out of kindness, could we please turn the projector off? I did it, okay. I'm guilty. Thank you.
Who wants the box?
I don't need the box.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you sure? It's super fun.
It looks fun. I project. So I guess my first question, I've got a couple of questions. First of all, with vertical farming, it would be really interesting, or I'd like to hear you address the energy input.
Sure.
As far as carbon, and then as far for David, I think you at least we're leading to the point where some of these seeds could have reduced inputs for farmers, and maybe have the same yields. So I'm just wondering, A, if you've seen that. I know it's pretty early on, so maybe that's hard to measure. And B, if you haven't seen it, there's also that cultural. I mean, I've looked in Africa and Mexico and a lot of places. There's this kind of cultural idea that, well, yeah, if we get the seed and we use the same amount of herbicide, pesticide, fertilizers, then we'll get even more, and that seems to be a hurdle for a lot of even like techniques of application where farmers can, training could apply a lot less if they do it at different times of the season, and it's very difficult to convey that to farmers. So I guess that's 2 questions, one for each.
Okay. I can't give you a short answer to your question, so I'm going to have to say let's have dinner sometime, or invite me to your class, and then I can give you a full presentation on the yings and yangs of energy. So let's talk about some places first that they would laugh at that question. I can take you to Iceland, right? That's not a big country, but it's a country that has so much energy it doesn't know what to do with it. In fact, it pours up out of the ground sometimes and kills people. The same is true for Italy. The same is true for the North Island of New Zealand. The same is true for the southwestern portion of the United States. You can find places, the same is true for the entire island of New Zealand, whatever they want to, or rather Australia, whatever they want to call themselves. It's a gigantic solar panel waiting to happen, and they're doing that, by the way. So they also have rich coal deposits, so they're torn between these fossil fuel usages and clean energy, okay? So France gets 80% of its energy from nuclear, so the air in France is absolutely pristine. It might glow in the dark, but it's you know, that sort of thing. So when you look at the energy considerations, wherever you put that farm, it will depend on how much the energy costs in that area, all right? So it's about 10 cents a kilowatt hour in the United States. There are some places where it's higher, some where it's lower, but it's about 10 cents. So the efficiency of the lighting that you need for the indoor farming becomes critical. And 10 years ago, I mean, this idea was laughed off the screen, basically. I gave a few talks at a few places where people were empathetic, but they always came back to this issue of LED lights and lots of energy and lots of, who can afford this? I mean, a head of lettuce might cost $5, but some people can afford that, and they would like that head of lettuce because it's produced under pristine conditions, right? So, but today, the LED lighting industry has addressed the issue. And now, instead of being 20% efficient, 100% of the electrons come in, 20% come out as photons, it's now up to 68%. And that's Philips. And that happened in a single day. I mean, well, of course, years of research, but when they made the announcement, it changed everything for some growers. It's still a problem, but it's not an insurmountable problem. It's an issue that has to be addressed, okay? So I say that. The carbon footprint of vertical farming is hard to predict because you don't know all of the inputs. And that's true for outdoor farming too, by the way. Yeah, the sunlight is free, but the fossil fuels that you use to plow the fields, that you use to plant the seeds, that you use to weed, that you use to harvest, that you use to ship, that you use to store, that you use to, it goes on and on and on. It turns out to be 20% of the total fossil fuel use in the United States is for farming. They don't even talk about that. If I had that much money, how many billions of dollars does that turn out to be?
I don't know why he's touching me.
It's come on, you've got an MBA from Harvard. You're supposed to know this. No, it's a lot of money. So if we had that much money to offset the cost of doing it indoors, I think we wouldn't spend a tenth of that much that they're now burning outside. But the real issue is, what is the cost of farming on land that should be ecologically functional to produce health benefits for humans, like filtering the air, filtering the water, preventing runoff, preventing soil erosion, those sorts of things. Those are big issues, and if you don't add that up and put that into the equation, then your nose is getting longer. How's that for a short answer? But I love the question, because I think it's a great jumping off point to think about how would you end up doing this. And so that's the real issue. And people are doing it now, and they're making money doing it, so that's a good sign.
And I think the second part of that question was basically, so you make plants more water use efficient or more nitrogen use efficient, but how do you make farmers actually use less water or less nitrogen? Won't they just use this and then hope to improve their yields? And the answer is sometimes. You know, those are the two things that we're focused on initially most. And the way we handle that is, with regard to water, water is mostly free in the United States. Yeah. And that's a problem all by itself. It's almost impossible to get people to conserve something for which that has no price. So we as a society have to solve that problem. We've solved it sort of locally by going to areas where they're inherently short of water. So if you're farming in West Texas, you don't have enough water. Okay. You're basically using whatever's available to you or whatever falls out of the sky. So a more water use efficient plant is inherently valuable to you. With regard to nitrogen, it's a little better, because if you can make a plant more nitrogen use efficient, that means they get to spend less money on chemical fertilizer. So there's a real economic trade-off, and one that we think we can make effectively.
I should have said that these indoor growing technologies employ two basic technologies. One is called hydroponics, of course, and the other is called aeroponics. And the difference between those two is dramatic, but the difference between those two and outdoor usage of water is really dramatic. Indoor farming with just hydroponics uses 90% less water, and it's all get recycled. There's a a greenhouse complex in Wilcox, Arizona called Eurofresh Farms. They're not a vertical farm. They're 1 story tall. The whole rooftop is solar panels. They recycle all their water by dehumidification of the indoor environment. The only water that leaves is in the form of tomatoes. It's a remarkable thing. Aeroponics uses 80% less water than hydroponics, which is even more remarkable. So why not try those things in places like California, the Middle East, Australia, places that are really, so water challenged. But people still would rather use the water for their plants than they would for their drinking water. And that's a big problem because then they still have to drink water. So what do? They drink the runoff. And that creates huge health problems in vast populations. The other thing is that they use human feces as fertilizer. So I'm a parasitologist by training. I taught at Columbia's Medical School for 30 years. All I taught was how you acquire these parasites from soil contamination of your food and water. And one way to short circuit that is not to use human fertilizer. Just don't do that. And so using minuscule amounts of commercial fertilizer that targets the roots of a hydroponic or aeroponic system is much different than just spreading it out all over the place and hoping that some of it the plants take up. The rest washes off into the oceans and into the air and things like this. So you're right. When fertilizer is cheap, everybody uses it like it was cotton candy. When they realize that there's only so much phosphorus left in the ground to mine, to put into the commercial fertilizers, we've got maybe at most 200 years left. What politician thinks in 200-year cycles? None. So for 200 years, hey, we're good. All right, I'll worry about that when we get to it. You really? Is that what you're going to do? You're going to worry about that when we get to it? I want to hear that again so everyone can hear that. You're going to worry about it when we get to it. Really? What a tragedy. What a tragedy of thought. So how do you get people right? How do you get them to think for 7 generations, unless you're a Native American? And they have no problem with that whatsoever. They easily think that way. Yeah.
I have a question that directly relates to what you were just talking about. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Sure.
We can hear you, but the recording won't be able to hear you. So you should use them.
You can just repeat what I say. It's pretty simple.
Can you?
Uh-huh. I hope it's polite at least.
It's somewhat polite, yeah.
So if you do a short question, it'll be easy for them to repeat.
Okay.
Sure.
It won't be short, but here's the precursor and then here's the question.
Okay,
So-
we're gonna
All right, here we go. All right, now I have the box. So this talk made me think of 2 things. One is something that I picked up in college. I'm a grad student here. So at college, I heard about this really cool class that did something that was really approachable to everyone in America right now, which is they took an old mill building, or they designed a project where you take an old mill, and on the first floor you have Google Internet servers, which immediately brings industry to a defunct mill town. And you have your servers on the base floor, and then above you have a greenhouse that is partially powered by the heat generated from those servers. That's a cool idea. That's a great idea that politicians can sell, and that's something that America can approach. But then you think about things along the train of thought that you guys are thinking about, which are these big realities that we don't want to address, that politicians don't address clearly now in 2016. And you think about how beef is so inefficient. You think about the water usage and all the chemicals and all of that nonsense. And you think about how America loves beef, and how the hell are you going to get America to stop loving beef and start eating crickets? And so I'm wondering, how do you guys make your message approachable to people, especially in the political climate that we're in now? And how do you think we could market this to people in a country that is privileged and will continue to be privileged probably forever? And how do you even begin to make that approachable? Yep.
I'm really glad I don't have to repeat that question. So, I'll give a high-level answer and then a more specific one, maybe. The high-level answer is you don't have to solve the big problem. You just have to pick a small one and solve it. And so, what each of us is talking about is a small piece of the bigger problem. But by breaking it down into small pieces, it makes it seem more achievable. The second part of your question how do you sell it to society, is that I don't think about it that way. I really approach this from the perspective of a capitalist. How can I create something that people want to buy and are willing to pay for, that is also good for the environment and good for consumers? And so the reason we're able to sell our first product on 50,000 acres of cotton is because it's good for cotton farmers. It also has a whole bunch of other benefits, but the cotton farmer doesn't really care about that. He or she cares about it because they think they're going to make more money. And I believe that's the most efficient way to make most change. It's just, rather than try to do it from a societal perspective, you try to do it from a customer perspective. Right. How do you create a solution to a problem that people want to solve and are willing to pay to solve it?
Yeah, the first part of your question is easy. The second part's tougher. Selling buffalo as beef is more difficult, but I'll get to that. The use of old buildings, every mayor of every city wants that to happen because it costs a lot of money to tear these buildings down. It costs more money to just leave them up, but do nothing with them. Because it's a source of rodents, it's a source of drug distribution, it's a source of poverty, it's a source of a lot of different things, but it's nothing good about a used building that sits in the middle of an abandoned portion of a city. So Newark, as an example, has now got a building called Arrow Farms, which used to be an ironworks in the middle of the Ironbound district. It's going to be a shining example of what's possible. And they got their funding from Goldman Sachs, the city of Newark, which is, of course, one of the richest cities in America. And, well, according to Mark Zuckerberg, at least. And the Prudential Life Insurance Company, they cobbled together $40 million. And that was so much money for them that they not only remodeled this ironworks, but they have 2 other facilities in other cities, which are almost identical to the one that they use as their flagship store. They supply leafy greens for the restaurant industry in the Ironbound district. That's what they do, and they do it very well. That doesn't solve the food crisis problem, but it says what's possible. Okay, so you need to see what's possible first. Remember, Roger Bannister was the first one to break the 3-minute mile. You don't know that probably, but he was
4 minutes.
4 minute. Well,
3-minute mile would be something.
4 minute. Okay, 4-minute mile, 3-minute mile, picky. The point is that he broke a record that no one else had done before, and then immediately after that, almost everybody could do it. Just put your mind to it. Hey, they did that. I can do that too. How many times did we go to the moon? 18. Come on, you do it once and you can do it. Now, okay, so now we have examples of what to do. Not exactly how to do it for your particular question of crickets. I don't eat crickets, by the way. Trout eat crickets, I eat trout. So, but buffalo graze on grassland. Let's restore the grasslands and let's bring back the buffalo. It would be so easy to do that. Ted Turner would just be, yay, finally somebody's listening. It's fat-free meat, it's free range, it's wild. It's harvestable. Come on, we slaughtered how many millions of heads of buffalo to get rid of them so we could build a railroad that nobody uses? It's crazy. It's crazy logic all the way through. So you could do that. That would be one possible solution. Everybody's meat consumption in the States, I think, is going down. Everywhere else, it's going up. So that's a big problem. And that's another issue that I couldn't possibly address. Not really.
Can you throw the box? This is the fun part. Yeah,
That's right on there.
Yeah, nice work.
What does the cost analysis look like on all of this? Because these buildings obviously cost a lot of money. What's the life cycle of a hydroponic system? And you're having to now pay people to harvest, a lot more people to take care of these plants in a very scientific way versus instead of mass farming where you just have one person in a big machine. So are they a lot more expensive? Are you getting your money's worth? Because obviously that's going to be really important to make change in America.
Yeah, 2 versions of a vertical farm. One is highly automated. Go to Japan, you can find them. 3 people work in a building that's 100,000 square feet. And go to vertical harvest in Jackson, Wyoming, one of the more challenged areas of financial poverty. It's not true at all. And they're hiring the developmentally challenged to work inside that building because they want to employ them. And so there's a program for that in Wyoming to allow that to happen. And so they took advantage of that. And they got a grant from the state of Wyoming first. They found all these people that were in the local area that were unemployable, and then they employed them to prove that you could do that. So those are good models for both of these approaches. If you want to automate everything, you can do that, sure. But if you want it to be employment-based, as is Aero Farms in Newark, as is Vertical Harvest in Jackson, you can do that too. So your choice. You pick.
More money out of the amount of crops you make on a vertical farm than you do the amount of crops you make on a flat farm?
There's no way to answer that question. The poverty of farmers is palpable. The poverty of farmers is palpable. If they make $15,000 a year clear, this is not Monsanto now. This is the farmer that makes the corn for Monsanto. If they make that much money, they're doing well.
How would you get farmers, sorry, this is like really long questions, but how would you get farmers to transition to this if you didn't show them directly cost-wise? If you didn't say you're gonna make $10 more off 15 bushels of whatever than you made on 15 bushels of flat farming?
Well, let's go to where the area of need is the greatest, and that is China and India, where hyper-urbanization is occurring. And as the result, why is it occurring? It's occurring because farming is failing. There's one simple reason. Climate change is affecting those two places more than any other place for a quarter of the world's population. And those people still need to work, and they want to work, and they want to farm. What if the reward was just you work in this building, you produce food, it's sold, and you get to take some of it home every night, and you get to eat? We won't pay you. You can just eat every day of your life, and you can feed your family. I mean, they could say that, and people would agree to that, because right now they have nothing. So those are really baseline models that you can use. You go up from that, of course, and if you start a collective and everybody pitches in their efforts and they put their minds together, you can have a commune of people, of 10,000 people that own a vertical farm that feeds them and makes money for the commune and saves the environment and makes life livable in an area which used to be an abandoned portion of a city. So those are all possible models that you can say, what do you want to happen? Not what could happen, but what would you like to have happen? And so you create that.
Okay, so you just throw it.
Wow.
Hello? Is this,
Please ask him a question.
okay. Thank you for coming, by the way. This is super cool. Your work is really inspiring. I'm just curious, as with any really cool, innovative idea like vertical farming, there are definitely going to be some challenges and drawbacks. And so I'm curious, how do you foresee implementation in big cities despite lack of space and expensive land there? As well as, do you see this as more of a top-down kind of process of city planners and politicians and the sort making more spaces for and investing in vertical farming? Or do you see it more of as a bottom-up kind of thing of people starting their own farms within their houses and local neighborhoods, or a mix of both?
I guess that was for me. Again, it's an open book. I mean, you can color in those pages any way you'd like. You can draw any picture you want. And everything will happen to begin with because everyone will try everything. And then the successful models will emerge from that sort of industrial evolutionary kind of process, just like it has for cell phones and for flat screen televisions and efficient airplanes and those sorts of things. Everything that we take advantage of now has had a life of failures, trial and errors until finally we got it right. If you have enough money to survive through that, you're going to come up with the correct answers. And so what is your question? So you were asking me a question, and I have to ask you the question, because everywhere you go, I don't mean to throw it back at you, but everywhere you go, it'll be a different question, and it'll be a different answer to that question. So in China, it will be one kind of answer. Even in China, you've got multiple places to deal with. In India, the same. And I get inundated with email from people from all over the world now because I've sort of been identified with this project, and I have to give them these kinds of answers, and sometimes they're very satisfactory, and other times they're, gee, what are we supposed to do? Use this. That's our biggest gift. I mean, we're born with lots of rugae in our brains, and you have to use all of it in order to get this to work right. So.
Thank you.
So this will be our last question. And then afterwards, we'll go outside and there's some food and you can talk to them in person. So last quick question, and then we'll move outside. Let's start down here. Why do you throw? I can try.
All right, so I think my question is perhaps a little bit more suitable for David, and I'll start with this short and sweet question, and then I'll explain myself better. So the short and sweet version is, what do you think of GMO regulations currently? And so now I'll explain myself. Currently, if my memory serves me correctly, it takes about 13 years to bring a GMO to market, and so it requires a big capital investment to create it. And that limits the number of companies that can produce that kind of initial investment. And so at the same time, if we were to reduce regulations, it could potentially allow a freer market of creating these sort of technologies. But at the same time, it would probably make many people uncomfortable, even though I could probably list for a long time the number of academic societies that have said that GMOs are fine. But I work in a mammalian reproductive lab, and I don't really leave it. So as for someone who's closer to the farm, what do you think?
That was a very well articulated question. Thank you. So just for background, in case, just to get us all on the same page. So a GMO is genetically modified organism. It basically means we've taken a normal organism, say a plant, and we've inserted genes from another organism into it in order to get some specific characteristic. So one of the most influential genetic modifications to plants is called the Bt gene. So we took a bacteria, which is abbreviated Bt, and it makes a insecticide. We pull the genes that cause that bacteria to make the insecticide, put them into a plant so the plant itself makes the insecticide. It's really useful because now the plant is protected from the bug, but it's scary to a lot of people because it means that we're now, at a high level, we're now eating the insecticide. But even at the most basic level, we've modified the plant in some way that nature could have never done itself. Okay, so now the question is, it takes a long time to get a new GMO trait approved. 13 years is a pretty good estimate, and probably $300 million in terms of investment. And your question is that appropriate? Should it be faster or should it be slower? My point of view is that regulation is roughly appropriate right now. And my rationale is, so GMOs are a huge debate, whether GMO technology is good or bad. My point of view is that technology itself is never either good or bad. It just is. What we do with the technology is the good or bad part. And we've done a really lousy job with GMO technology. We've tended to focus on problems that we've tended to focus on things that solve problems for the farmer or enrich the companies that are selling GMOs, but we haven't done anything that helps the consumer. And at some level, everybody knows that means we're taking risk, we who are eating these foods, without any corresponding benefit. And everything's about risk and benefit. If you had a disease that killed 100% of the people who suffered from it, unless you took a drug that killed only half the people, you'd take the drug because risk-benefit, that's a good trade-off. The problem with GMO is that it's not a good risk-benefit from the perspective of the consumer. And so I'm not in favor of making it easier to get GMOs approved.
May I add something?
Absolutely.
Because I love that answer. And it's a great question because there's a lot of mystery associated with GMOs in the general public because people don't understand what it means to manipulate the genes of an animal or a plant, right? So, by the way, science is not a belief system. So if you say to me that you don't believe that GMOs are any good and you're a scientist, I'm curious as to why you came up with that as an answer. Because the evidence is it either works or it doesn't, A, and B, it either does something that benefits something or that doesn't benefit something. So I think when you modify a plant to resist more glyphosate so that you can kill off weeds that are now resistant to the levels that you have to use now in order to get the corn as an advantage over the weeds that want to invade the same area because you've spread all this fertilizer out there and said, come on and eat. All right? So now they want to modify the corn plant to resist higher levels of glyphosate, which is the herbicide, so that Monsanto can sell more glyphosate. That's basically, I mean, they're doing it so that their plants will survive too, but they're just playing the same wars that the pharmaceutical companies play with antibiotics and resistant microbes. It's the same evolutionary outcome. Okay. None of the plants, as far as I know, that are grown indoors are any different from the plants that are grown outdoors. There's no difference of these plants. You don't have to modify them at all. What you're doing is making them extremely happy by making the conditions so good that they grow to maximum capacity. All right, so, but every plant that we eat has been genetically modified, every one of them. It just hasn't been done in a laboratory. It's been done by artificial selection, which is another process that people don't understand, right? And how do you get an apple from a little tiny plant that looks like this to begin with? How do you get corn from 3 different grasses? How do you get wheat from 4 different grasses? How does that work? Well, don't ask. Just shut up and eat. You know, that's the answer. Just be thankful for what you have. Well, when you start mixing these metaphors at a political level, you can sway people this way or you can sway them that way by simply vilifying technology and saying it's an evil genius that sits behind the cloth and manufactures all these genetically modified foods and they're all going to be bad for us. Well, BT is, the insecticide that you were mentioning is not actually an insecticide in the sense that it shuts off some neurological pathway for an animal. What it does is it creates a crystal inside the gut tract of the insect because the acidity of the insect's gut tract makes this crystal form when that is swallowed. Well, that doesn't happen in our gut tract. Our gut tract is big compared to an insect's, so we don't really care. It's just another protein that we ingest, we digest it, and that's the end. When you modify rice to have all of the amino acids that are essential, so you don't have to eat beans and rice, you can eat just rice, and you can get all 12 essential amino acids. That's a good thing. That's a very good thing. So you shouldn't say it's a bad thing or a good thing. It's what does it do? And then who benefits? So the International Rice Institute is working at that level. And they're working to improve a single bite of rice for half of the world. I think keep working. You're going to get it right someday. So.
And can I give a quick plug for the talk tomorrow, since we're on the GMO topic?
Absolutely.
Actually, in this room tomorrow at 3:30,
okay.
John Lang will be coming from Occidental College talking about what's so controversial about GMOs. And he actually doesn't actually address a lot of human health stuff, which a lot of the academies have talked about, but rather the cultural and ecological side of GMOs that's also causing contention. So if you guys are interested in that, that's tomorrow in this room.
What time?
3:30.
Tomorrow, this room, 3:30 GMOs. If you would like more information about vertical farms or you're interested in doing this course part 2, come up to this table. We'll have a laptop. You can put your email. We'll send you some information. Thank you to Indigo, Environmental Science Department, and both of these incredible speakers. And thank you to you all for coming. Yeah.